Welcome to our webinar today, everybody, in which we'll talk about Microsoft Teams and native recording for the contact centre. Thank you very much for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the session. At the end of the webinar, we'll have a slot for questions. Please use the question button in your GoToWebinar panel to type your questions in, and we'll ask Pete to give us some more insights and answer. If we miss your question due to time constraints, we'll follow up after the webinar, and this webinar will be recorded and a copy will go out to all the registrants. There'll also be an exit survey at the end. Please don't close your browser before you've had the chance to give us some feedback. We'd love to hear how we went. Okay, so moving on to our opening slide. Today we're talking about enabling contact centre recording natively in Microsoft Teams. I'm Barbara Stewart, I'm from the marketing department, and I'll be introducing Peter Fedarb, who will be doing our presentation today. And next slide. And before we introduce Pete, I'd just like to say a little bit about Enghouse for anyone who doesn't know us well. Enghouse has demonstrated immense success as a publicly listed company for many years on the Toronto stock market, which values the company at over $2.5 billion. We continue to acquire new businesses every year to contribute to our continuing growth. As a tech product company, our single biggest investment area is in our R&D, research and development, for our comprehensive customer experience portfolio, which is on screen now, which is the largest in the industry. Now, introducing Pete.
Peter
Oh, you're going to introduce yourself?
I'll introduce myself, Bob. I'm Peter Fedarb. I'm a solutions engineer with Enghouse Interactive. I've been working within the company now for nearly 20 years, most of that being in the UK base, but I've since moved into the APAC region. So a lot of the webinars that you'll see in future, hopefully I'll be doing the present with you, and you can spend some more time with us in future. So what we're going to take a look through today is just really set the scene around what's going on in the recording market for customers and what the uptake is and why people are using it. We'll then look a little bit around sort of Teams recording and what the options are there, as well as looking at some of the product, and hopefully there'll be some time for a little bit of a demonstration around some of the new features that we've had on the system. But really around sort of what's happening in the market for recording is the latest feedback studies from many of the surveying organisations out there are actually showing around about 81% of companies globally are using recording. However, when we dissect that into more of the Asia-Pac region, the ANZ organisations actually are scoring around about 92% of organisations are using recordings. And of those, about 95.5% of them are actually storing their recordings in the cloud these days. That's where they're choosing to store that historical data rather than having on-prem systems. So seeing the same shift of applications to the cloud, the storage around the recordings is also moving to that location. So we thought we'd take a little bit of time to start looking through the why people are using call recording and quality management. And lots of customers will have reasons around compliance and security to do that. So from a compliance perspective, making sure that if you're selling from a distance, for example, that you're following the proper legal representation for your company around making sure that things like sales contracts are being done verbally and being done correctly. And also looking around things like PCI compliance to make sure that when you are capturing sort of things, sensitive data like credit card information, for example, that they're not being stored within the recording platform and that you're meeting that PCI. There's been a heavy shift around sort of, you know, the first early days of recording to be more from that compliance perspective and also from the dispute, customer dispute, what was being said by who to who, so that you could understand from that call whether customers had a valid point of view if they made a complaint. Now, there's been quite a lot of a shift in the last sort of 5 years plus around that, moving in more into a training and evaluation of those recordings. So not just really capturing them and using them when there is a complaint, but actually using them to train staff to have a look at how your organisation's customer satisfaction is actually happening. So not only actually understanding what your internal staff are doing, but also what the voice of the customer is in that customer satisfaction, to understand what's being said by customers during those calls. And by listening to those recordings, that's giving you the key insights into that and having a process to actually measure and score those and put a value on that education that you're putting into the business, but also the impact that's having on your customer satisfaction, which is really going to be increasing the productivity. So it's moved along from sort of base recording and sort of dispute resolution and compliance more into a feedback loop for businesses that are going to help your your customer success story and productivity in general. So obviously around sort of storage of any data, everybody's very sensitive about data storage these days. Therefore, making sure that systems have the proper security around how we encrypt the data. So when the recordings are sitting within a storage area, how safe are they? And we can use many different methods of encryption to encrypt that through. But there's also the other rules or rights-based access that we need to consider that on who has access to that data, who can play it, who could possibly export it if they needed to within that. So we always make sure that within these cycles of development that we're looking at using the most latest security technologies to make sure the data is safe as where it is in its location in situ, but also making sure that as a business you have controls on who has access to that data, and that's following the most modern technologies as well. Obviously, when people are looking at recordings around more of a compliance, there's been quite a lot of push over many years to sort of have manual pause and resume for compliance. Most people are starting to look at more automated compliances these days. Therefore, if I was to access my payment gateway portal via a browser, for example, when we see that within a browser, the application can then tell the recording to stop while that payment process takes place. When we see that payment process URL finish off to a completion, we then resume the recording to make sure that that element of the call, that we're not recording any sensitive data. But we also do lots of different API integrations and web services for it, where if you wanted to design your own application, you could do to build that perhaps into a CRM process if you have something happening in your payment process that's outside of a browser, perhaps an older application that's there. We also work with many of the payment portal providers, people like PCI Pal as well, in that sort of product set. We also have lots of different requirements that are coming out of customer space around doing triggers for recording as well, where you don't want to blanket record everything that may be happening within an organization. Just perhaps, a trigger may be for a call to come down a certain queue, or when it's being interacted by certain customers perhaps. So we can actually put recording rules into the system that says only record these or exclude these types of calls from recording as well. Therefore, it's making sure that you're capturing what you want to, but you can also take the noise out of the recording if you wish to as well. Obviously, part of all of this compliance as well is about auditing and having the information about when it was recorded, looking at things like the watermark of the recording to make sure that nobody's manipulated that, and also having audit trails there on who's had access to the recordings and what they've actually done with those recordings during the processes. So that helps the compliance team ensure that they can actually say the data that they're storing, they have the access controls, and they can make sure that that's fully audited if they need to meet that for part of the compliance regulation. It also brings it down to another area, which is the archiving of recordings as well. Everybody tends to have different recording storage, requirements around there. Some people that are more financial organizations may have things like a 5, 7 or a 10-year compliance that they need to make sure they keep those recordings within there. But businesses that don't have those type of compliances may only want that sort of 3 to 6 months history there. So having a flexible storage rules within the system means that we can keep a certain amount on box, if you like, we're on the actual sort of recording server, but we can archive that off onto mass storage devices, whether that's sort of more sort of block storage within sort of the more cloud environments, or perhaps your own data center warehouses that you want to put that into, and making sure that we can match with those technologies to make sure that you can store the recordings for as long as you need to help you meet that compliance area. So we're going to move back to Barb at the moment, where we're going to start the first poll. We're going to move into the section where we're going to be looking around Teams recording there. But Barb would just like a little bit of feedback from you guys around if you are moving to Teams, what you're moving from. So could I hand it back over to you, Barb?
Sure, thanks, Pete. So if you're moving, as Pete says, what platform were you using before? Or what are you using now as you're planning to move to Teams? So the poll will come up in a second. And if you could please just complete one of those. And we'll just watch the, I'll watch as the results come in. And once we think that most people have submitted something, we will show the results on screen. Still coming in. Okay. All right. So here is what we are seeing from the attendees on this webinar. So pretty cool with Skype for Business and Cisco, and then we have a number of people on different other sorts of platforms as well. So it's probably not that unexpected, Pete.
Good. Thanks for the feedback, everybody. So moving into how Teams recording is being done, we'll cover what the Microsoft way of doing recording is to start with. And this is using what most people will term as the Graph API. Some people refer to this as the Compliance API. Basically, what will happen if you use the Microsoft API version there is when your calls are coming in either by the direct routing, whether this is being done by a carrier or if you're using the Microsoft call plans at that point in time. As your calls are traversing through the Microsoft cloud, what they will do is notify your recording server that a recording is actually, or a call is actually in progress. And what it will actually do is to stream a copy of that recording across to the recording server. So that's really where the voice is actually being captured at that point in time. There isn't any cost to the recording API currently. There was a little bit of a period about 2 or 3 years ago with Microsoft where they were going to charge for that as a sort of user-based license. But they've redacted that pretty quickly, and currently the state of play with Microsoft is it is free to use. But there is a constraint which we've put into the screen here for you, just to let you know, and I'll explain what that means. Is basically Microsoft Teams environment is within Azure, within the big Microsoft data center that's out that way. And Microsoft don't really want the responsibility of pushing that externally out across the public internet. It really is going to cause them huge issues around sort of, security and compliance around that. So if you want to use this method of recording, you can do, but the restriction is that your core recording platform must live within the Azure infrastructure because they only want to push it across their backbone. That's the only place where Microsoft can assure you that they are going to provide the security. Obviously, if they start to push that out across the internet, at that point it becomes very unsecure, and obviously Microsoft could be held accountable. And that's really the limitation of that API. Is you want to use that method, the recording service must be put into the Azure environment. Other than that, the setup is fairly easy to do around enabling that within the recording API within the Azure portal, and just designating that we can access that using the client secret. So we would punch in what your tenant ID is and then connect into that environment, and Microsoft would start streaming those recordings through to us. It does give the benefit that you can record anything that comes in by direct routing, anything that comes in by call plans, or anything that's happening internally. between sort of two Teams clients, if you like, within the system. And that's quite an important point, because this is the best way of capturing the voice within the environment, because it's pushing out anything that is traversing through your Teams environment. That includes your internal calls. If you can't host for any reason within the Azure environment, but you still want to do recording on Teams, there are two other options that we can cover, but they do come with some limitations. So the first method is if we were using a contact center within that environment. So for example, our EICC product is quite popular in the Microsoft Teams world, or also our CCAS solution. What we can do from that event is to any calls that are traversing through the contact center as part of Teams, any of the contact center queued calls, for example, we could forward a copy of those recordings through to the QMS server or to the call recording platform. That way that we're getting a copy of the queued calls that are coming in, or if the agent is making an outbound call, because that's still part of the contact center ecosystem, we could also do the agent outbound calls. But the limitation would be that could only really do that if at that point in time the calls are traversing through the contact center. So an example of that, of an internal Teams call to a user, does not traverse through the contact center. It's more of a peer-to-peer activity between the two Teams clients. So it's something that's going to be outside that contact center. Also, if the agent had a DDI, that would come directly to their Teams client there, and again, not traverse the contact center. So you wouldn't have a way of capturing that voice. But if you want to record queue calls and agent outbound calls, this is a valid method, but it does exclude that you can't do your internal to internal calls or also the agent DDI calls at this stage. I'm sure there'll be some changes to the way that Microsoft will do the recording in the future, and we're looking also from some different architecture perspectives around doing that, but there are current limitations on we can only pass across from the contact center calls that are traversing that contact center application. So the other method is a method that's more common to sort of people that would understand the session border controllers, or SBCs. That's the device that connects the outside world into your Teams environment. This may be done at carrier level. And it's using a protocol that's called SIPREC, which really is saying that the voice is traversing the SBC. Therefore, the SBC can create a connection to your call recording platform. Basically, it's almost the same as a SIP trunk that it's creating between the two. And really what's traversing across this SIP trunk here that's connecting up into Teams can be replicated across to the call recording platform. So this will get you all of your inbound and outbound DDI calls and queue calls, because all of those external calls are traversing the SBC. However, we've got the same limitation that if we're making an internal call up here between two users, that isn't going anywhere near the SBC, so we can't actually record that. The other limitation would be if you're using Microsoft call plans, i.e. Microsoft telephone numbers that are not being provided by another carrier. So if you're using Microsoft call plans, they're pumped directly into the cloud as well. So again, those wouldn't traverse an SBC, so they wouldn't be able to be recorded. Therefore, if I jump back a couple of slides, to get the best out of recording, if you're looking to move to recording or looking to move to Teams and want to understand recording, having Azure infrastructure in place is your best bet if you want to capture all scenarios that are within there. If not, there are some other methods that can be used to do that, but there are some compromises about different call types that you may capture, and they may be important to your business. So it'd be good if you are not just to think of it as blanket recording, but actually to talk to your business users there to understand what are the important call types that they are recording, so it will help you make this choice in future. So we're going to move on to a second poll now, and I'm just going to hand back to Barb there, just for a little bit of feedback about who would be using the recording within your requirements.
Sure, thanks, Pete. So I will launch this poll right now.
So we're just looking to understand the core recordings you have. What areas of the business do you see having recording?
Votes still coming in. Okay, so I'll close off the poll now. And here are the results. So most of the people submitting responses today are actually wanting to record across the full organisation. And as you can see, there are just a small percentage who are just doing it for the organisation without maybe having a contact centre. So thank you for those results, and I'll pass you back to Pete.
Nice, thank you, Barb. So we're going to take a look at what we've been doing in the last few releases and move into what the future releases are. So we're going to cover off the key features that we introduced in the 9.1 version of QMS. And what we've really been looking at within there is the third-party authentication message. SSO is really what people term it as, but to take the technical terms out of it, we've all got sort of things like multi-factor authentication these days, things where we have to type a code in, perhaps off of a mobile phone, or you know, authenticate via different processes these days. So we've introduced into our product sets an application called KeyCloak. It's more of a third-party piece of software that realistically allows us to talk, because our customer bases will use many different types of authentication methods. This is really a centralized system that allows us to allow you to use anything that you want to as far as that authentication. So if you choose to use the Microsoft methods, then we will just connect that through to the Microsoft applications. But if you've got multiple methods, perhaps you've got things like old sort of key fobs that give authentication codes, all of those can still be brought into the KeyCloak application to make sure that you're getting the verification that you want to protect the data that people are having access to. So it's moving very far past the basic that people used to start with, username and passwords. Then people went to more having a single sign-on with a Windows authentication that's there. But this is also taking it to the next level of those multi-factor authentications to make sure that if you do have policies within the business to access machines and things like Teams that we might need to type in sort of PIN codes for, that all of our applications from Enghouse will also support that as well. We've also done some enhancements into the Azure speech to text transcription. So we've obviously got the AWS transcription within there, but we've also done the Azure text-to-speech transcription as well. So we're looking at expanding who are the providers that if we have a recording there, what are those global services, and giving you the vendor of your choice that you want to transcribe those down. Obviously, there are some world leaders in AWS and Azure being the both. But if there are any more out that way, if you'd like to feed it back to your account manager of any other services that you'd like us to attune to, we've done the top global 2 that are there. But if there's anything else out in that field you'd like us to take care of, then let us know. But the support for doing the speech transcription to transcribe that speech down to text so you can do text analytics on that data is now enabled for Azure. We've also started to look into more of how people will be using or want to record sort of Teams in future. It's not just about the Teams sort of voice recording within now. As we've done within the contact center, we've also sort of elevated the recording platforms to also record emails and web chats and bot conversations within there, and also video into the contact center as well. We're also sort of quite often on Teams meetings these days where there's sort of screen sharing interaction going on internally and collaboration that's there. So the first sort of section that we've done is to handle the screen sharing. So if I was on perhaps a call with Barb, we want to share some content between the two of us, we can actually capture that screen recording within them. We are working behind the scenes. We're elevating that into more of larger group meetings around there. There's a few more complexities about sort of people swapping the screen shares and us sort of consolidating that back into one application. But we should see that evolving in the roadmap in future slides, where we should be able to do the full Teams meeting recording at later dates. But at this point, it's more about that point-to-point activity and recording the screen sharing activity between internal or collaborated users if you're federating between different people. We've also done some more enhancements around due dates and evaluation tasks. So we did a lot of work in the versions before this around doing things like calibration of the evaluations and also sort of workflows of evaluations. I'm going to show you that a little bit more in the demonstration a little bit later. But basically, we've just managed to put some due dates on there and some reminders on there to help people understand that they've got work to do to make sure they're giving that feedback to the business and evaluating things that need to be done. So we've also done some enhancements around sort of sensitivity of data there. So we're making sure, as we've done with other products within the portfolio, that we're redacting any sensitive information. So sort of trying to anomalize things like customer names from log files, telephone numbers as well, so that that information, if we're trying to understand a fault that's happening on the system there, when we're passing the information through to our development teams, that we're taking out any customer sensitive information out of those log files is usually irrelevant to us. Therefore, we just redact it down to sort of normalized data, and therefore we make sure that we're not taking any of that data outside of your environment, just what's important to us to understand and help support in any issue resolution. We've also added support for the Enghouse video products within there. So if you're using our video application there, we've added that as a recording media. So if you're using that within the contact center or as a point-to-point video solution, those can all be stored and evaluated as per the other medias within the system. We had some enhancement requests around sort of a customizable splash screen, which I'll also show you within the demonstration. This is going to be good for putting up one-time service notices or persistent service notices there. Therefore, if you've got some information that might be pertinent, somebody sees every time they log into the system, or perhaps if you've just done an upgrade and want to put out some release information or where the training notes are internally, or maybe links to our videos, we have a mechanism now where you can actually change a login screen. And that's going to be quite useful when it comes to pushing out and help enabling training with inside the business, or help enforce policies if you need those reminders that go in. Also been working on a lot of migration tools. Obviously, there's a lot of different moving to different types of technologies from on-premise to cloud now. So we've been working on a lot of tools behind the scenes. It's all about sort of us lowering the cost of ownership for you guys to make sure that when we do sort of have to move things to the cloud for you or do upgrades from there, that the tool sets the engineers use automate most of those processes. Therefore, it reduces the amount of time and effort it takes from all sides to do that. So moving into the 9.2 key features that are there, we've actually sort of started to look into doing the translation services. So not just the breakdown of the voice media into text media there, but if that happens to be in a different language, that we can convert that to a language of itself. So it's taking that feedback from getting the voice into a text format and now changing the language around that. We've done that with the AWS services that are there, and we'll be approaching that with the Azure over the next releases as well. But AWS is the one that we've started with, and we'll be working on Azure, and that will be coming up in future releases. So again, we've been doing a lot more to reduce the cost of ownership there. It's more around sort of containerization. We're starting to change our products in the way that we write the code to make it a little bit more easier and deployable. This is going to be an ongoing project for us because things and applications are changing in the cloud. And to put it into more layman's terms of what we're trying to achieve is to, rather than us having to download software and upgrade your machine there, making it more of an app store type friendly installation, where if you want to do an upgrade, you can pick and choose, and on a click of a button to actually sort of get that to download the latest version to upgrade your system with you, and give you obviously a rollback path in with that. So that would actually really sort of cut out a lot more of the engineering that's in place now. There's a lot more that we can do in that cloud app space, but we need to make sure that we're making sure that the product is taken down into bite-sized chunks so that we can interchange them quite easily and make that a slick process for you. We've also done some additional reporting for Teams tenancies. This is not really more for end user customers, but we do have a lot of partners that are doing multi-tenant ones, which also make it cheaper for their end customers that are using sort of a shared solution, if you like, there. You're just giving sort of better understanding around who's using those tenancy, what the frequency of use is around there. So we've added a bit more reports in this. If you are using a hosted solution by one of our partners, again, there should be some more reporting availability around accesses and controls for you there as well. It's also fully integrating the QMS product into our CCAS solution that's there. So we have a version of that at the moment within the CCAS solution there, but what we're really making it is more interchangeable so that we can keep on parity with our releases of our private hosted solution, that we can roll that easier into the cloud solution to keep those updates within those tenancies up to date as swiftly as we can do, and to make sure that all of our customers, regardless if you're using on-prem solutions or if you're using cloud-based solutions from us, that you're receiving all the updates at the same speed. We've also done some updates into the basic authentication for Gmail. Gmail made some changes around the base authentication processes that are there. So when we need to connect and send emails via the cloud on Gmail, we've modernized those processes to make sure that we're conforming with the authentication process, mainly OAuth if you're more technical in how we do that. So looking a little bit forward on what we're looking at in 9.3 roadmap, we're still going to be looking into more enhancements around sort of the ease and lower of ownership, mainly around that containerization, making app-based, if you like, versions of the QMS software, so it's easier to upgrade and to download. Obviously, all of our latest sort of changes to QMS and doing Teams recording, we will be keeping up with our Teams certification. Obviously, that's key and important to us to make sure things that we're doing, like screen share recording it, that we're getting everything approved and stamped by Microsoft to say that we're doing everything properly. So that will be part of that cycle there, just to go back for the certification around those different areas of changes. We've also going to be looking at sort of lowering some more cost of ownerships there, using faster protocols on how information is being shared between the systems that are there. Again, more techie side there, but you can see we're putting quite a lot of effort into modernizing and making sure that we're using the latest and the best around those client, the client technologies. We will be building in some more reporting there. We've been asked for a unsuccessful recording report there. So if we actually see a trigger, perhaps, from the Teams environment that says Pete went onto a call, but if we didn't get a matching recording that says a recording was actually sent to us from Teams there, that we're able to get those reports analysed pretty quickly. So it gives us a way of quite easily seeing, should something have happened, we believe so, and we don't believe that we managed to get a voice stream for whatever reason. So if there is ever any technical issues around there, we're going to have some reporting that's going to make it easier to figure out how often that's happening or why that may be happening within the background, and enable IT people to actually have that as more transparent to see if there's any connectivity or recording issues that are happening. Also looking at doing that translation of the text recording, so that's where we're going to be doing the Azure section. As I said, in the 9.2 we did the AWS version, but we'll also be doing the Azure version, and we'll hopefully be releasing that in our 9.3 release. Looking a little bit further forward than that into our version 10 roadmap, we're going to continue on about sort of the rapid deployment around that. You can see there's quite a lot of effort in these different dev sprints that we're doing into getting those sort of containerization and microservices done so that we can make it swift and easier. This is when in the 10.0 we're going to start hopefully have something more to release around the full Teams meeting recording there. So if there's multiple people sharing and presenting at the same time, that we can tie all those streams together. If we can get that out any sooner, we will do, but we're targeting around that 10 release, just because there's quite a lot of nuances to how we're presenting those different streams, or being presented those different streams within the Microsoft APIs that we have available to us. Also looking into building in some recording controls into the Microsoft Teams client there. So putting an add-on, if you like, into the Teams client, so an app you can bolt in there that will give you the ability to use some recording controls if you want to be able to sort of pause those recordings, or perhaps, you know, add flags to them from that sort of area. We always have had a desktop application to do that. We're going to try and build that into that single interface so that you're having all of your controls in the one place around that voice solution. See, we're also working on an Enghouse BI product there. I know some people have sort of, you know, Power BI, but Enghouse is going to have its own BI platform there. So regardless of our products, they will be all pushed into one BI platform there. So if you don't have something like Power BI and prefer to use something from us that is going to have all of your solution in one place rather than in different reporting applications, the QMS will be adopting that system in the version 10 release. So that will make sure that there's a lot of reporting that can be done from a central repository, regardless of the Enghouse product that you're using. So I'm going to hand back to Barb at this point in time, just for a little bit more of feedback around what your business, main business driver for recording. So really looking to understand if you're taking a view more around compliance, or whether it's on from quality control, or whether you're looking at more from that dispute resolution and protection.
Thanks, everyone. Quality control seems to be winning the race. Still coming in. Right, still going. Real thought going into this one. Okay, so I'm going to close the poll off now. You haven't voted. Yep, a few last. Thank you. So here are the results. So quality control, obviously 50%, with dispute protection and resolution quite close behind, really, and compliance much further back. So thank you, everybody, for your feedback. It's very interesting.
And it sort of matches the discussions that I generally have from pre-sales with a lot of customers. The interest is quite a lot around how they use the core recording platform to ensure quality, rather than sort of, you know, that tends to be moving that shift away from dispute resolution and protection. Quality is also being that key driver as well. So I'm going to, on that topic, just break out of the slide deck just to liven the call up a little bit more, and just show a little bit around some of the enhancements that we put into the system and what we're trying to achieve and put into place with quality. So these are some of the enhancements that have been done across the system already. And the first one that I'll cover off is just a quick, easy one, which is just the notifications. It's one of my favorite ones to look into. And what we've done around the notifications, so you'll find this if you're on the more current versions and up-to-date one, under the administration, under the login notifications. What we can actually do now is to create a notification. And what the notification will enable you to do as a business is you can give that a name. You can then decide what you want to see on the splash screen. So I've just said, thank you for taking time to view the demo. And then I've then said, you know, here's a link to a hyperlink to where we've put the training material, so we can see where that link goes to. And obviously we can include things like logos and pictures within there as well. So I can put some information up in front of any user as they log in. I can decide how often I want that to do. So I could have that set to always display. I could have that set so the user can discard it and say, I'm done with seeing that. It will repeat until they choose to say that they don't want to see it anymore. Or we might have that as just a one-time messaging that's on there. And obviously within the system, we can have that saved as a draft. We could have it as an archive, as in, keep it there and maybe make it active again later. Or we can have it as a system or released message at that point in time to make it appear in front of users. Now, an example around this is around sort of, if you want to put release notes or training material up here, here's an example of, some key features that have been put into the 9.1 release. If I want to make that appear in front of users, I could do. What we're really talking about is that if I log out the system and then just log back in, we should see that one of my active ones, if I've configured it correctly, should appear over the top of there. So we can see now that I've got my notification appearing. We can see that I've got the thank you for your time. I've got a hyperlink here that I can click to the material, and I've just put a picture in there just to represent that we could do a corporate logo. Obviously here it's saying notification 1 of 1, so if I have multiple of these active at any one point in time, I can always next or previous and scroll through those. You can have multiple alerts coming through. But if you have something like compliance reminders that you want to put in, or access legislation like you would do if you did a VPN, for example, sometimes you get those pop-up policy messages there. If you want to put that in place, you can do on the latest versions of the software. So moving on to what we've done around the evaluations, and everybody's starting to use it as a way of checking consistency within the business and quality within the business that's there. So what we've enabled, the first one that I really like, are these evaluation calibrations. What we can do with those is to create what we term as a calibration. And what that actually means is that I can send out a piece of media to multiple users for them to all scorecard it according to how they think that piece was done. And what we can see is as people are completing this within there, from all of the different scorecards there, I can see that there's actually an imbalance in the feedback from the team. So I may send this out to my 5 team leaders, and if they're all giving me different feedback, then it's going to be hard for us to say that we can really measure quality if we're all judging it differently. And as humans, that's the hardest bit, that we need to make sure that everybody is taking the same view and using the same process around that. So the calibrations are quite easy to construct, in that you can decide a scorecard that you want to push out, insert some media that you want them to evaluate, and then take feedback on who's actually scored that, and then also understand whether or not you're getting balanced feedback from the team. If you're not, that is really highlighting, yes, you are measuring compliance or quality across the business. However, if you're not all doing it in using the same stick to measure, then there's going to be a problem with the information metadata that you're feeding back and trying to make changes for the business. So the calibration is a nice way for feeding out to a team of your compliance team or to the team leaders to say, am I doing the right things? I also like this from more of a training perspective, where I can send this out to some, initiate these through to, a new team of agents that we may have employed within the business, some new trainees within there. I could actually have a training plan set up where I just continually add users to this, and I start to get the feedback of what that agent's impression is of marking the quality of that call. Therefore, that's going to give me the ability, if you like, to see where they're at compared with the other people that have done. I could send it out to senior agents and a couple of trainees and look at the indifference in there. And this is what we're trying to focus on around the calibration, is if you calibrate that you're getting the same measuring stick being used by all of the employees on exactly the same call data. So these aren't exactly difficult to create. We can decide a scorecard. I might choose that I want to do it on my compliance handling scorecard. I could set a due date if I want everybody to complete it by a certain time frame. Perhaps I'll do that on, we'll do it by the 22nd, hopefully before everybody breaks up. And then I can decide what media that I want to add in. So what do I want them to listen to or judge? So I can do the usual search for content, decide the example call that I want everybody to do, and add that media in. I've got the example of the scorecard that I'm using within there, which is just going to be one of your standard templates that you use. However, it's going to be due by the 22nd, but it's nice in the world that someone gives you a reminder that something's going to happen. So I'm going to say give them an email 24 hours before to remind them that there's something to do. Now I can just basically save that as a draft, but I can also now decide who I want to actually action that for me. Is it my team of 5 people? Is it going to be my trainees within the system? I may just give it to one single person, and I'll use my system administrator as an example, as a trainee that wants to get that feedback around that system. So I click OK on that and then click Save. And we've got that calibration there, saved as a draft, targeted at the people with a due date. When I'm ready to, I can start that. And that will then appear when the people come into the evaluations. They'll be able to search and they'll be able to see all of the evaluations that are targeted to them. So if I just select my system admin within there and do a search, we can see within the system that we're getting all of the that's recordings. That's right. Apologies, just clicked on the wrong tab. I hit search. I can see that for the system administrator, I've got my compliance handling, I've got my call structure, I've got 2 that I've got active here, and we can see that this one is due on the 22nd of the 12th. So from a user's perspective, I can just go in and edit that. I can see the media and just complete an evaluation as normal. So I could go through and do the scoring. I can still save things as drafts if I want to. So we're only really completing the normal process. If I want to do things like drag media across and add notes to it, I can still do that. So I could add notes around different segments of the call should I wish to. So completing just a standard evaluation. And what that will then do is when I go back into the calibration section on the system, it will then allow me to sort of have a look at those feedback results in the system, and therefore I'll be able to understand if that activity has been started, what were the feedback results. I only partially completed it, therefore we can see how far I've got through it, that I haven't actually completed everything. So this is going to enable whoever's honing the complete sort of compliance within the system or looking at the quality, if you like, within there, to take that feedback, see if it's balanced the feedback that you're getting, and if not, where the areas are unbalanced within the system. So hopefully that gives you an idea of how you're going to be able to start measuring that you're getting the right feedback from everybody within there by doing these as mini campaigns, pushing them out to people and using them as part of your training campaign to make sure everybody's on the same level playing field. The other area that we've introduced as well is evaluation workflows, because typically over many years, people have nominated perhaps a team leader to do an evaluation. But evaluations take time to do, listening to those phone calls, obviously evaluating them. There has been a great swing towards more agents doing an evaluation first. So perhaps getting an agent to evaluate them and then just getting the supervisor to perhaps review them. But in order to do that, we needed more of a process where we could create a flow to help automate that process. So we've actually put in these evaluation workflows that we can put steps in place for who can do the evaluations. So I've got an example here where we start a flow where an agent evaluation is going to be done. And we can decide at this step who is going to be doing the evaluation. So I put it as perhaps, the team leader is doing it at that point in time. When the team leader has done the evaluation, they'll be able to move that evaluation onto its next cycle of the process. So they can assign it through to the next process, just a tick of a button. And what we might be doing is pushing it through to the agent at this point. So at this point, we might be putting it through to our evaluation user that's within here. And for them, asking them to review that, we may allow them to change it. We can block them from making changes to that scorecard, but we might also allow them to make changes to that scorecard. So the supervisor could do the evaluation. The agent then gets to review that, and they then have a process choice here to approve or dispute that resolution. If they approve that resolution, everything's good in the world, that both the team leader and the agent are agreeing, that just then marks to a complete evaluation and becomes part of the reporting within the system. However, the agent may completely disagree with there. Again, this is about finding that balance and getting people to agree around them. So we've actually put a dispute process in here where we're going to send it through to another process for another team to review, where we're actually going to get that through to our quality assurance team within the system. And they're going to actually decide whether or not that is completed or not. And obviously this is more of a simple flow that I've just put together as an example. But we could do that in a quite different way, because one of the other scenarios that people may want to put into place is perhaps the evaluations done by a team leader to start with. If it passes, not a problem. If there's a failure, maybe it goes for the agent to review. If the agent agrees with the failure, then that's just put into the statistics and it's completed as an evaluation. But it does give the agent the ability to dispute it. And that dispute could go down to a quality team. It may go back to a supervisor that may review it and accept that the supervisor was right, or they may revise the quality of the scorecard at that point in time. And the workflow could get more advanced than this. Perhaps once the quality team's checked, perhaps we're going to push it back to the team leader. We can have more multiple steps around here. It's about understanding who's going to be doing the quality and what that check and balance system that you require as a business to be in place, and how you're going to use it as a learning tool. Because if the supervisors are doing the evaluations, pushing them from the agents to review their mistakes and having that as an automated process, obviously you have to allow time within an agent's day for them to still be able to review these within there. But that time is going to be that training time that's going to help you get that improvement. So whether or not you're going to have the agents doing the review first, or perhaps the supervisors first, but then getting it escalated and moved through the business to make sure that that first person that checked it is all agreed or been identified and people have been reviewed. It's about arranging that process to make sure there's that feedback loop in place. And this is why we've put these workflows in there, so it'll be very easy for them to complete them, assign them, and then somebody gets a notification to review. We've also built into the dashboard as well a few more helpful tools around, evaluations that are assigned to you. So if you've got a lot of evaluations to do, or if you're perhaps an agent on the system now, when you're greeted by the dashboard screen when you first sign into there is a widget that could be added. Obviously, it could be moved around the screen like any of the other widgets that are within the system, that is going to show us exactly the evaluations that we've got there, what the due dates are, and obviously, if we've part completed, how far we are through those. So we're trying to keep that workflow in view. We're also doing those email reminders as well. So this is about trying to get that as a more flowing process within the business to get the most out of that quality feedback and make sure that everybody, not just the compliance team, understand where the faults are, but it can be returned to the agent to make sure that it can be done there as well. Okay, so I'm just going to move back into the deck for us. So that was just a brief overview through some of the enhancements we've done today. So I'd like to thank everybody for joining today, and we're going to move into some questions in a second. But I'd just like to say on the slide deck there, if you want to go into any more detail or talk to us about your quality processes that are within there are some of our contact details here if you don't know your account manager and want to have a session with someone like myself in pre-sales that helps look at that quality with you within the business. Feel free to use one of the contacts within here or contact Barb or myself directly. It's entirely up to you. But we're more than happy to help spend the time to help you understand how you get the best out of quality within the business. So we're just going to move through to questions, Barb. So I'll just let you review the questions, if that's okay, Barb.
Well, I'd love to review the questions, Pete, but at the moment we don't have any. So if anybody would like to add any questions, please use the GoToWebinar pane to just enter your question, and we can go through it now. I know that, as often happens in your webinars, Pete, people have got everything they need from your excellent presentation. Thank you.
Hopefully there'll be a video to review as well, but it's always worth having a direct conversation to understand what your requirements are. So if you do have any questions and you don't want to pop them in now, then feel free to let us know, and we can always have a one-to-one session.
Sure, and just remembering that there is an exit survey as well, so that if you please don't close your browser to exit, if you do exit and take part in the survey, then you have the opportunity to provide feedback, which is great. We do have one question's just come in. This will keep you on your toes, Pete. There are competitive solutions for Teams recording, such as Stubber. What is the differentiating factor for QMS recording of Teams?
So the Teams recording, let's talk in plain language around that. The competition have access to the same APIs that we do, so they can do the same recording capabilities that we can do. They have access to all of the same information. The difference is realistically around how we're approaching what we're doing with that data behind the scenes there. And I'm not saying that QMS will do everything that every other competitor will be. We're not that naive around the products within there. But if you have a look at things like the calibration of the evaluations and the workflow around the evaluations that are there, when you're interested in doing quality, it's not just about recording the voice from Teams. If you look around sort of what happens if you're looking, especially in the contact center marketplace, are those other solutions going to be able to take things like emails, web chats, chatbot information, video from your contact center as well? If you're just looking at call recordings, that's a very narrow view around what quality can be for the business, because it's any contact from anybody that's out there. But if you're only looking at voice solutions doing very basic recording, a lot of the platforms out there, a lot of the competition will be able to do exactly what we're looking to do. But when you're starting to look more into that quality, you have to have a look at what their offerings are around that compliance. Most people will do scorecarding, but can they do things like that workflows? Are they looking at it's important to do that collaboration step to give you the feedback, not just getting the raw data, but actually getting usable data, and also getting those workflows happening between the two that within the system? So there isn't really a differentiate around how we record Teams voice. Everybody has that same access to the same APIs and will probably be using it in the same way. But there is what we're looking to do with those data once we capture it, and that's where you'll find some of those differentiators.
Thanks, Pete. And also, of course, what you might be looking at doing down the track too, to make sure that what you have on your roadmap is going to be available from your preferred vendor. Yeah. So another one has come back. Yes, just to say thank you.
You're very
Excellent.
welcome.
Thank you, Peter. All right. Thank you. And content workflows was of particular interest. So thank you very much, everybody. And we are right on the button for timing. So enjoy the rest of your day, everybody. And thank you so much for coming. And we look forward to seeing you at the next one. We'll send out the follow-up from this. And please have a great Christmas and New Year's season. Thanks, Pete.
Thanks for your time, everybody.
Bye.